Today's guest is joining us from a place that shows up in book three, where clues take root. George Washington's Mount Vernon. Yes, that Mount Vernon. And yes, it matters to space. This is a special show during our middle grade March reading challenge. And Sara Marie Massee from George Washington's Mount Vernon is going to help connect the dots between the books and the location. I'm putting extra attention on the characters in the books and the storyline so that you see how the books support you as a teenager when you're making the important decisions as to what path you want to take in life. Welcome, Sarah Marie.
Thank
Before
you.
we jump into farming, can you tell us exactly where you are and why this estate is such a big deal?
Yes, I am actually at Mount Vernon today. And it's a big deal because this is George Washington's real home. The land here is the land that he owned and that he lived on. The surrounding parts of Mount Vernon, it's where he conducted the experiments that they talk about in the books. The mansion is actually a huge amount of it is original to the 18th century.
And the pictures that we all see. And I was out there just looking through the website, and it's so beautiful to see all the attention to detail with the house and the farms. Most people think George Washington, he was a general, he was our first president. But what was he obsessed with when it came to farming?
Everything. I mean, to be a little bit more serious, he's obsessed with applying scientific ideas to farming. And I said everything because he's interested in large scale ideas, like how do you organize your workforce to make sure that the wheat harvest goes as quickly and efficiently as possible? And he's also interested in small scale ideas like what tools work the best for the wheat harvest, or what variety of wheat grows best in what kind of soil, or like what time of year do you plant the wheat to avoid the Hessian fly, which is this really bad pest in the 18th century.
Why was crop rotation such a radical idea in his time?
Yeah, it really was. It went totally against the norms in America for farming. Now, crop rotation wasn't a completely new idea. People had known about crop rotation since the early Middle Ages over in Europe. But here in America, people came here to get rich fast. And they weren't interested in rotating their crops because they could exhaust the soil. They could get to the point where crops wouldn't grow anymore and just buy cheap land out west really quick. And so by being interested in maintaining the soil, Washington is just completely changing things around.
And he was doing this differently than his neighbors, and that made his land more productive. Can you kind of talk more about how that whole little atmosphere there at Mount Vernon really worked to be more productive?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to systems thinking. Washington attacked productivity from multiple angles. I talked about workforce management before. Washington was a really brilliant manager. He does like labor studies to figure out how to make things go the fastest. But he also is interested in soil health and the science of crops and farming. So he's interested in productivity that way, increasing it through science. And then he's also interested in technology and how that can improve farming.
And this was in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Remember that. This was not yesterday. This was not when your grandpa had a farm. This is over 200 years ago. So, this is radical ideas that we're talking about here in a brand new country.
Yeah. And like building off of that, the idea of a scientific method had only just been invented at all. So like to use it here in backwater America, because America was not considered to be well educated or very important at that time.
He was really expanding, helping to turn us into this great nation. So there's a lot of detailed notes and letters that he wrote about farming. Why was sharing his ideas so important to him?
It really comes down to civic duty. Washington thought, well, he knew that most people didn't have the knowledge to experiment. And he also recognized that a lot of them couldn't afford to experiment. Most American farmers were just raising enough crops to support themselves and their families. And so he thought that it was his job as somebody who did have those resources to come up with a system that worked for everybody. And I actually, if you don't mind, I have a quote to share. So this is something that George Washington wrote that speaks to what I was just saying. So he wrote this in a letter to John Beal Bordley, and he wrote, "Experiments must be made, and the practice of such of them as are useful must be introduced by gentlemen who have leisure and abilities to devise and wherewithal to hazard something. The common farmer will not depart from the old road till the new one is made so plain and easy that he is sure it cannot be mistaken, and it will lead him directly to his object."
That is a wonderful quote. For the kids watching, what is crop rotation in simple terms?
So, the idea behind crop rotation is that you change what you're growing from year to year and from season to season. So, if you think about, say, you had 3 fields at your farm. So, one field might be growing wheat, field 2 might be growing corn, and field 3 would be growing something else. Well, if the next year you move wheat to field 2 when it was in field 1, and then you kind of move it all around, then that's a crop rotation. Now, Washington
Okay.
actually developed like an even more complicated rotation. He eventually had a 7-field system.
I didn't realize it was that large of a scale. So, and I'm certain he was changing a lot of the crops so that it kind of had an off year, I would guess. Is that
Yes, yeah. So, a huge part of crop rotation is making sure that your land has a chance to rest. I had said that field 3 might be growing a crop, or you might leave it fallow, which means that you just let the weeds grow, you let it do its own thing, and that actually gives the land a chance to rest.
In talking about crop rotation, why does rotating crops protect the soil?
Yeah, so it definitely allows the land a chance to rest, like we talked about. But one other thing that you can do with crop rotation is you can be active about putting nutrients back in. And this is something that Washington actually did. He conducted experiments with different kinds of soil to figure out which one did best. And so he uh, left some of his land as pasture land because manure is a fabulous fertilizer. And he knew that as the animals grazed, they would poop, and that would actually fertilize his fields. He also learned about special crops that will improve the land for you. Has anybody here ever heard of nitrogen fixing crops? So the nitrogen is a chemical that plants need to grow. All plants need it. Certain things like beans, clover, buckwheat, they will actually store nitrogen in their roots. They collect it from the air through their leaves. They store it in their roots. And then when you plow those crops into the field, they release it, and it's like a super compost for the field. And so Washington is one of the first colonists to do this here in America.
and that kind of leads into the next question, which is what happens when you don't rotate the crops?
What happens is that the crops are taking nutrients out of the soil. And the longer you grow crops, the more nutrients they take. And eventually all the nutrients is gone and nothing will grow. No crops, but not weeds, not natural things either. And so when there are no plants in the ground, then their roots are gone, and they're not there to hold the soil in place. And so when the rain comes, then there's erosion, and all of the fertile topsoil just goes away. And then you can't grow anything at all. And that's actually happening during Washington's lifetime. Like, he sees that here in Virginia.
Oh, I didn't realize that was actually happening.
Yep.
And for kids who are studying your history right now, you know that the Dust Bowl, you'll study that the Dust Bowl happened in the West because of the erosion and the inability to grow plants. So you'll kind of see through history when you go back and study it. I was that little history nerd in high school, so I was diving deep into all of the history and geography that I could possibly get my brain wrapped around. And it's really important to do that. So you see how George Washington was working on this farm and creating these processes to help this common man so that they would be able to adapt these easily. And bring that fast forward to now, and we see how that's happening with the various technology and how the United States of America leads the way in providing some of that for other countries too. So get back on track because I do have this tendency to go off on a little side note sometimes. What do you think George Washington would be excited about today? If he were alive and he got to experience things now, what do you think he would be most excited about?
I think that there have been a lot of new developments in farming that help with efficiency, and that's something that he's interested in improving efficiency. So I think that's something he would be interested in. I think that he'd be very interested in sustainable farming. A lot of the ideas that he came up with, the practices that he developed that he found that worked well, line up with sustainable farming practices today. And then another thing that I think that he would be really interested in is international cooperation when it comes to people doing science about farming. Washington was not just doing science all by himself alone here at Mount Vernon. He was part of this community, and he's writing letters back and forth. There's no telephone, there's no internet. But he's still communicating thousands of miles away with other people who had similar interests, and they would share what they knew with each other.
And this was before they even had a postal system in place too. So he was doing this himself, conversing back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean with his counterparts in England and France, and creating this little pool of knowledge that all of them got to collaborate on and make bigger and better.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, sustainability is a topic that's very important in the books and very important right now as we are moving forward into space and exploration out in the stars, and how do we create a sustainable life on the moon or on Mars. What do you think Washington's experiments teach us about sustainability in extreme environments? Everyone kind of sees how that goes into the books a little bit.
Yeah, I think his experiments show us two things. So one thing that they show us is that sustainability works because how I said that things like the soil here in Virginia was deteriorating. Washington is able to take this landscape at Mount Vernon that is really not doing well, and he's able to bring it back to productivity again. So if you think about an inhospitable climate like on the moon or some other planet, it means that if you do sustainable practices, you might be able to turn it around and make it productive. And so that's one thing that it teaches us. But I think his experiments also show us that sustainability can be economically sustainable too. Washington, the idea of sustainability or like environmentalism, that doesn't exist in Washington's time. So a lot of what he's focused on is, economic sustainability, which actually means protecting our planet through doing these things that are good for the land.
And sometimes too, when you're researching, so for those of you who are going to go out there and do some research now that you're listening to the show, also think about the terminology that was used in past centuries too. So I know a lot of people used to use the word conservation instead of sustainability. Just realize that there's other terminology that's used so that when you're doing the research, you can go down the right rabbit hole and it'll help lead you to more things that you wouldn't find otherwise. Now, moving forward into you and what you do, because every single one of these books is going to be talking about the different skills that you need in your career and skills that you need to be learning right now as a teenager, something you didn't realize that was important that you learned in art class when you were in the 8th grade ends up saving the day when you're on the job doing something. You're like, I know how to fix that. I did this, and we can use this technique. So explain to everyone listening, what is your actual job title and what do you do on a normal day at Mount Vernon?
I am the manager of our historic trades department, and we're a living history department. So we do hands-on demonstrations of things that people did in the past, like cooking or blacksmithing or things like that. And then we also sometimes are in costume and sometimes we're not. And on any given day, I might be in costume out in front of the public, spinning thread or something along those lines. Or I could be in the office. I do the normal things that managers do. So I hire and I train people. I also do research and I develop tours and I write programs and so I could be doing any of those things. And then I do a lot of the behind the scenes planning for those programs as well.
You have a very big job that just encompasses an incredible amount of skills that you blend into your day to day. So it's not just I'm going to sit down at my computer and type away, and I'm not going to have to talk to anybody. You are out there, communication skills, organization, being able to communicate on a variety of levels, and then the incredible amount of project management you have to do too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, like, for me, people skills are definitely at the top of my list in terms of what I use on a day-to-day basis. Research skills are also a big one. Like you said, organization and like project management. But I think one that you didn't mention is passion. Like,
Yes.
particularly in this field, well, in any field, if you can bring your passion to it, it will be much more fulfilling for you, but also you'll be able to do a better job.
So talking about passion, like what got you so excited and so in love with Mount Vernon that you have been working there for 18 years now? I know there has to be some huge passion that as a little kid you said, I really want to go do this.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got into museums by accident. I always loved history, but I didn't really know what I was going to do when I graduated, and I took this tour of a museum with my family as part of my graduation celebration from high school. And we visited this little tiny living history museum. And as we were leaving for the day, we were the last guests to leave. I made some comment about, gosh, wouldn't it be fun to work here? And we were passing the administrative office and my dad was like, well, go in and see if they have a job. And they did. And so, it wasn't something that I expected, but it was something that I found out I loved.
So you never, as a kid in high school, said, "Oh, I'm going to go be a history major and I'm going to go work at a museum." That was never in your vision of what you saw for yourself.
I, I, I definitely didn't envision museum work. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, I loved history, so I knew I wanted to do something in that field. I just didn't know what that would look like.
We don't always know what we're going to do when we're little kids. If you would have heard, when I was 12 years old, I announced to the world that I was going to design everything that I could. And I've done that. But I never in a million years thought I would be writing books and founding a nonprofit that focuses on literacy. That never entered my mind when I was in high school, ever. So it's always important, I think, keep your mind open, like you walking into that office and saying, "Hey, can I get a job here?" It's just this little ask that you do, and people around you will see that passion, that energy that you have and say, "Yes, come here. We are going to show you how much fun this job really is."
I think it's about knowing where your interests lie and then just being open to seeing where that takes you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What kind of education or training helped you with your career path now?
Yeah, I have a very traditional liberal arts education, and I know that that's kind of falling out of fashion these days. But I will say that, especially for this job that I fell into, it ended up being a really good form of preparation because what it taught me to do is to think. To think well and to be analytical and to be able to apply skills in different kinds of circumstances. And so I think it actually was very valuable for that reason.
And did you go beyond your bachelor's or
Oh,
what
yes.
levels of training did you
Yeah, I
get?
have a PhD in cultural studies. So I guess like if you're talking about my more formal,
So we should be calling you doctor instead of just, "Oh, Sara Marie."
I suppose, but yeah, so like my more formal specialty is what scholars call memory studies. So I'm interested it's kind of like history, but it's like not just what happened in the past, it's how we as a society remember what happened and then what that says about us as a society.
That's incredible. I've never heard of it being that distinct.
Yeah.
I really like that. What surprised you the most once you started working at Mount Vernon?
I think when I very first started here, what surprised me the most was how many people come. It's a really busy estate, and I had come from this very small museum, and so um that was a huge shock. But also how many people working here it takes to sustain the estate and to keep things going. But I think now, I guess this isn't so much surprising as something that I really value and love, is that we're constantly learning. Like, Mount Vernon is not static. We are constantly doing new archaeology, discovering new things in the documents that survive. And it's not like these are new documents. They've been around for 250 plus years, some of them. But we're always finding new things.
And when they're doing different renovation projects there at the estate, they're bringing in all the scientists and researchers and really digging deep into it, not just at a place like Mount Vernon. You don't just slap a new coat of paint on
Oh, no.
the wall. There's a lot of scientific research that goes into it. So if you're one of those who loves the data and going back and doing the archaeological research and really discovering what they used in 17 whatever year when they were building the house, I mean, it's a perfect job for somebody who likes to dive deep into that kind of information, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to how you can have interest in more than one thing. So because like a lot of the preservationists and the archaeologists, they have scientific skills or they have carpentry skills. There are a lot of jobs in the history field that don't necessarily look like a traditional history job.
Yeah. So you could combine your love of carpentry and woodwork with the history and working at a very historical location.
Yes. Or your love of chemistry and like doing paint analysis, or there are lots of different things that you could be interested in that would help you in this field.
Just off the top of your head, do you know how many visitors came to the estate last year?
I don't know the exact number, but we've been getting about 800,000 people a year since the pandemic.
I saw 1 million on the website. 1 million visitors. Yeah. I had no idea you had that many visitors.
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, it was 1.1 million was our average.
Wow, that's incredible. I love hearing those kind of numbers. It makes me excited that people are still wanting to go back and experience the history and dive deep into how America was built. And that brings us to a topic that most people don't know unless they like really research it, but Mount Vernon almost fell into ruin. Let me give you a little bit of the timeline so you understand where this was in the whole scheme of the world. So George Washington was the president in 1788. Mm-hmm. He died in 1799. So in 1853, the estate was going into decline. Now, here's the wonderful thing. Miss Cunningham, go-getter of a woman who led a preservation effort to save Mount Vernon. Now, remember, telephones have not even been invented yet. Telephones did not exist until 1876. So here she is in 1853, pulling together the funding and the support and the women to create the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And they pulled enough money together to be able to buy the house from Augustine Washington and made the final payment in 1860 so they could take over the estate and turn it into a museum. That to me is incredible because I know people right now are going to go raise the money and they don't want to pick up a telephone and they have access to it. And she didn't even have telephone access at that time. So I think it's incredible that she gathered this group of women together to spearhead this association to save the house of the first president of the United States. What do you think it took? And I know you, having worked there for 18 years, you know more of the history about her and just how she managed to inspire everybody to get behind this effort, because it also was not being, the country didn't want to put any funding into historical sites. Augustine Washington didn't want to sell it to the ladies to begin with. And the state of Virginia had to step in there and say, yes, this needs to happen. So tell us more of what you know about that story. Was it unusual or controversial for a woman, Miss Anne Pamela Cunningham, to lead a preservation effort in her time?
Yes and no. It really was, in the sense that, women didn't really have a position of power in society at that time. And it's also very unusual because preservation as a concept didn't exist. We were such a young country. We hadn't even been around for 100 years by that point. And so people weren't even thinking about preserving the past. And so to have that foresight was incredibly unusual. But on the other hand, women were seen as being not as involved in politics. And think about the timing of this. So they make their final payment in 1860. And this is right before the Civil War breaks out. And so the fact that this was a group of women was actually seen as an advantage, because the idea is that then neither the North nor the South would have control of Mount Vernon. It would be a place for everybody. And actually, during the Civil War, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association negotiated separately with each side and managed to get Mount Vernon to be declared neutral territory. And it continued to be a museum and a place of reverence during the war. And soldiers would come to visit, and they had to wrap up in a blanket when they came so that nobody could see what uniform they were wearing and what side they were from. So that was actually a benefit for them to be a woman. And also, women were seen as the protectors of our social values. And so, having them preserve the home of our founding father was very much in line with social norms at the time.
And how does preservation connect to the research and the documentation and the long-term thinking?
Well, they absolutely go hand in hand, because you wouldn't bother to preserve something if you're not thinking ahead, right? And so you have to have that view that maybe people in the future will want to see this too, in order to even put effort into preserving things. But once you set out to preserve a building or an object, you do have to do research, because you have to figure out what it would have been like originally. And like with Mount Vernon, it went through many, many changes, and the whole field of preservation didn't even exist. And so in the early years, the Mount Vernon ladies got to decorate the mansion how they wanted. And they were trying to be historically accurate, but they didn't always know like what the wallpaper would have looked like, or what color paint would have been used, or things like that. And so it takes research to go back and figure out how things were in order to put them back.
Mm-hmm.
And it also takes documentation, because if we are preserving things for future generations, they will also need to do work to preserve it for the generations that come after them. And they need to know what we did, what changes we made, what we left the same, materials we used, so that they can figure out, oh, did that material work, or do we need to use a different material this time? And so all of that goes hand in hand.
What might have been lost in not just buildings, but knowledge also, if George Washington's Mount Vernon had not been saved by a group of women who are still leading it forward 166 years later?
A lot of George Washington's story would have been lost. Partly that's because you can't understand George Washington entirely until you've been in his space, seen what he saw and experienced what Mount Vernon was like. But there's also like physical evidence that is left here. I mentioned that we're constantly doing archaeological excavation. And so there are things to this landscape that it can tell us that we would never know if we didn't have the estate preserved. I think you also would lose a lot of information about the people in Washington's life who did not leave as much documentation, but who certainly had an influence on him. So I'm thinking about his family members. I'm thinking about the hired workers here at Mount Vernon. I'm thinking about the enslaved people. These are people who might not have left written records, but the landscape here can tell us about their stories too.
Is there something that Washington tried that failed? And what did he do after that?
Yes, absolutely. He tried a lot of things that failed, but actually that's part of the scientific process, right?
Yes, that's life.
Yeah, that's life too. So to give you a specific example, one of our favorite things on the farm site that I manage is our 16-sided barn. It's a reconstruction of this invention that Washington created to process his wheat crop more efficiently, to get the seeds off of the stem of the plant. And when he designed it, basically it's a 2-story building, and on the top floor they would lay these stalks of wheat down, Washington would have them bring in horses to run on top of the wheat, and the horses' hooves would knock those seeds off. And then the floorboards actually had these spaces between the boards. So it was like a sieve or these slats, right? And so the seeds would then rain down through the floorboards into the lower story of the building, where they could be easily collected, but the straw stayed up above. So when Washington first designed that barn, he designed the slats, the spaces between the boards, to be very narrow because wheat seeds are small. So they were about half an inch wide, and they clogged up and nothing fell through. So he actually had his carpenters tear out the floor, and he had them rebuild it in 4 different sections. And so they had half-inch gaps in one section, 1-inch gaps in the next section, 1.5 inches, and then 2 inches. And they laid down the wheat again, and they tried it again. And what they discovered is that 1.5 inches works best. And it's actually about 90% efficient. Yeah, it was trial and error, and he figured it out.
And that is data collection in the 1700s, kids, let me tell you.
Yeah, from afar, because George Washington was serving as president during all of this experimentation. So he's not even at Mount Vernon. He's up in New York City, which was the capital during his first term.
So he's having to do this from afar and talk with his managers at Mount Vernon and dream big while he is commanding as the first president of the United States of America. That's a lot on one person's plate right there.
It really is. But we think that farming was actually his stress relief. Thinking about farming, that's how he relaxed.
If George Washington could see how his farm ideas are connected to research today, what do you think he would say?
I think he would be thrilled and excited. I mean, that was why he wanted to share his ideas, right? Like he wanted our country to be a leader, and he wanted his ideas to benefit his fellow Americans and the future.
So just imagine in these books, what he was writing down in his research notes, the girls are discovering this is going to go up into space. So I love bridging the history with the future in the books. This summer marks a major 250-year milestone being recognized here at Mount Vernon. What does that number represent, and why is it important?
Yes. This is going to be the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so we can really think of it as the 250th anniversary of the birth of our nation. This is us saying that we are going to be separate from England. And I think it's important because this is the birth of modern democracy. And it's still an experiment that we're all in together. You know, I think that it's been a really powerful and good thing in the world. And so, you know, it's just a symbol of hope for the future.
Is there any special activities or tours that you have created for the 250th celebration?
Lots.
I saw you light up with that question. What have you got planned for us?
There are so many, I'm actually struggling to even list everything that we're doing. You know, we're trying to mark smaller milestones as they come. So, you know, like smaller anniversaries of specific battles, anniversaries of specific conventions, you know, things like that. So the one that's coming up the soonest is some of my colleagues are going to be holding a reenacted Council of War, which is it's a real event that happened here, or not happened here because Washington was away, but happened during Washington's life as they prepared to fight for our country.
So all of you who are planning fun summer vacations, make sure you stop by Mount Vernon and possibly you will see Dr. Sara Marie dressed up in costume running one of the exhibits there, because that would be a lot of fun to actually connect with her in person after you watch her on this video. How does Mount Vernon use moments, you know, like these various celebrations to show that history is ongoing and it's not finished, and how we all need to support and get behind Mount Vernon as they continue to show this?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite stories about Mount Vernon, and it only just happened recently. So to honor the 250th anniversary, Mount Vernon has undergone this huge preservation project. The mansion needed a lot of work. Buildings get old, they need work. And before we started doing a lot of this preservation work, We had our archaeologists go into the basement of the mansion to make sure that we could learn as much as we could before we disturbed things down there. And what they found is 37 bottles of preserved fruit. It's mostly, yes,
That's so cool.
it's mostly cherries, but there are also some bottles of mixed fruit. There are currants. Yeah. So, and this is only the third time ever that we have found preserved foodstuffs that dates to the 18th century here in Virginia, and it's right here at Mount Vernon. So not all of those bottles were intact, but a large percentage of them were.
What can visitors learn visiting Mount Vernon that they can't get from a textbook, besides everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that being here lets you walk in George Washington's footsteps. It lets you see him as a real person and imagine yourself into that time period in a very different way. Washington was very private, and he controlled his public image very carefully, and so it can be easy to think of him as just the marble statue because he made it very difficult for us to learn about his private life. And so coming to Mount Vernon is one of those ways that you can actually get some insight into who he was as a human being, and then see him as a real person. But I think also it helps give you insight into seeing yourself as a leader too, because at the end of the day, Washington was just a guy. He was just a person. And that's something that he believed too. I'd like to kind of wrap things up today by sharing one last quote. I do not believe that we, the founders, are more inspired, have more wisdom, or possess more virtue than those who will come after us. So this is something that he believed very sincerely, is that, future Americans would be just as knowledgeable, as worthy as he was.
And that's the sign of a great leader. Well, history does not stay in the past, it fuels the future. And sometimes the road from Rocket City to space runs straight through a farm. Thank you for being on the show with us, Dr. Sara Marie Massee. Everyone, visit the Mount Vernon website. You'll see it below in the link. And consider visiting while the 250th anniversary of the United States of America is celebrated at key historical sites. And thank you for watching Books That Build Skills. If today's story sparked an idea, gave you courage, or helped you see what's possible, then we did our job. Remember, skills aren't born, they're built. One choice, one challenge, one brave step at a time. So let's subscribe, share this with somebody who needs it, and keep exploring, building, reading, and dreaming big. I'm Loxley Brown, and this is Books That Build Skills.